Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please welcome back to the stage Meg Szabo, Senior Editor for Bloomberg Green and Sustainability Events.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you had a great lunch. I hope you got to chat with some other people around. Just a quick reminder, if you would like to submit any questions to our speakers or answer any of our polls, just use that QR code behind me. Wi-Fi info is on the back of your badge. And you can also engage with us on social media using the hashtag SustainableBizSummit. And let's just go ahead and get started. We're going to turn to sustainable travel now. Please join me in welcoming Shai Weiss, CEO of Virgin Atlantic for a conversation with Bloomberg's Guy Johnson.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Shai. He has many things to say today. We're going to be talking about sustainable aviation, which to some people's mind sounds sort of like an oxymoron, but it is possible and the industry can do it. It's just going to be very difficult to get there. Sustainable aviation has many problems. The basic one is gravity. Which is something that I think we're all going to struggle to deal with in this industry, but there are ways around it. And at some point, this industry is going to use batteries, probably for smaller aircraft first. At some point, it's going to use hydrogen. But in the meantime, to get to the 2050 targets, the industry is going to rely heavily on more efficient aircraft, more importantly, more efficient engines, and sustainable aviation fuel. They call it SAF in the industry, but it stands for Sustainable Aviation Fuel. I think they need a catchier title. Producing enough SAF is going to be a huge problem. And that is the big challenge that the aviation industry faces and the fuel industry, the energy industry faces. At present, you can blend SAF with jet fuel up to a blend of around 50%. Shai's going to take that one step further. So Virgin Atlantic recently won a competition with the British government that is going to provide funding for a 100% SAF flight from London to New York. It's a breakthrough moment, and hopefully we're going to learn a lot of things from it. But it is the start of a much longer journey, and it is the start of an industrial revolution for the energy sector. So Shai, let's talk about it. I hope that was enough of an introduction. As I say, Shai has many things to say. What are we going to learn? When is it, and what are we going to learn?
So, indeed, first of all, my name is Shai Weiss, CEO of Virgin Atlantic. Really pleased to be here with all of you. Well, we won a competition, as you said, to fly the first 100% sustainable aviation fuel flight from from London to New York. It will probably be in November.
Yep.
And
why probably?
Because this is tough to do,
yep, okay.
And we need a lot.
No, that's the point. That's the point. It's tough to do.
It's tough to do. It's a first of its kind, and by definition, it will be the most sustainable flight ever flown across the Atlantic. That's the definition, because we're going to use 100% SAF, which is 70% less carbon emission. We're going to try and make it not just about the fuel, although the central thesis here is the fuel, but we're going to just also wrap around it a consumer proposition. I'll give an example. We already don't offer beef on board, and we haven't offered beef on board for a very long time. We're thinking, should we make it a vegan flight? Just to make a point, plastics, we've taken tremendous amount of plastics off the planes. So we're going to try and show what you can do on the fuel efficiency, of course, in the air, but how you tug the planes, and that should happen at the end of November, but it requires certification. It requires a lot of coordination. We're working in partnership with Boeing and Rolls-Royce and Imperial and Rocky Mountain Institute and many other people who are helping us get to this position.
There was a chart there a moment ago. It's vanished. I don't know if we can put it back up again. There are an outlook for sustainable aviation fuel. Europe is the red line. North America is the black line. The UK sort of, I guess, fits into the red line. We need a lot more aviation fuel, and aviation fuel is really hard to produce. So a number of things need to happen. We need better engines that use less of it, and we need more sustainable aviation fuel. But we don't just need more sustainable aviation fuel. We need the right type of sustainable aviation fuel. So you're going to use what's called HEFA, sustainable aviation fuel.
And I'll explain what that is. That's actually, we're going to use used cooking oils and transform them into jet fuel. We're not going to do that. We're going to announce a partner very soon. There is a partner that is going to help us make it. We're not fuel producers. And that's what is called first generation. The second generation is using industrial waste streams, for example, capturing the carbon emitting from large industrial facilities, steel facilities, and transforming it. And the third and fourth generation is really about taking green hydrogen, capturing CO2 from the air, and creating and fuel. But that's a long-term journey. I think on the previous slide that you showed that there was a black line. Yeah, this one. The black line is what we're going to be using. You can see the opportunities for the second and third generations are so much greater. But it's not easy to make. It's not clear where it will be made. But I have a prediction, as you see in this graph, most of it will be made in the US. A lot of it will be made in Europe, and as we're going right now, very little, if any, will be made here.
This is where I say Shai's got lots of things to say. Okay, why is it not going to be? Why is the UK had some real ambition here?
Yes.
There was a report that came out of the climate committee this morning. A bunch of MPs talking about this. We're falling behind. What do you make of what is happening here? Why is it happening here? Why is it not happening?
Yeah. So first of all, credit to the UK. As a leader in renewable energy, 40% I think of the grid is now renewable energy. Very much on wind, solar coming in, and other forms of technology. But aviation requires sustainable aviation fuel. And if you look around us, the US has announced, or President Biden announced, the Inflation Reduction Act. It's over 300 billion pounds to ignite this industry, and within that, there is a target of 3 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel. The credits in the US are 1.25 to 1.75 federal tax credits. So not only supply side, but demand side. The Europeans have started off with a demand side, so putting a mandate that 6% of the capacity must be sustainable aviation fuel, and they realized that that is not enough, and added supply side economics, so support by way of price support mechanisms through what the aviation industry will pay through the ETS or the credits.
The money stays in the ecosystem.
Exactly, stays within the aviation ecosystem. And the UK is just on demand side. And demand side, where there's going to be mandates, which we support,
so this
is
not
enough.
Sticks, not carrots. Basically, we need both.
We need both. We've been advocating for both. But, somehow aviation, and we need to understand why that is not getting its fair share of support from the government. Aviation on its own will not be able to solve this problem. And if we don't solve this problem, it doesn't mean that sustainable aviation fuel will not be in existence. It just will not be made in the United Kingdom, which means the jobs would be lost to other countries. Technological advances will not be made here, and the ecosystem will just go somewhere else. And at the end, consumers in the UK will pay more.
Number of things coming out of that. Does the UK not like aviation?
I'm not sure. I am not sure. That's a question I ask myself. I love aviation.
Good.
And I think a lot of you love aviation. I think our government is ambivalent on the role of aviation in an island nation. We saw it through the pandemic. Didn't get a lot of support. Virgin Atlantic, zero, other than furlough support, for which we're thankful. But our government, I don't think, has realized, or if it has realized, has not made a commitment to aviation as a strategic asset that brings tourism, allows for trade, connectivity, jobs. A recent study showed that every plane domiciled in the UK is accountable for 400 jobs and 27 million of gross value add. We need more planes here, and we're an island nation. So I think.
But in order to make that happen sustainably, we need to. What you're saying is, you have to make the investment now. You have to have the fuel technology here. You have to build the plants that produce it, and you have to build the infrastructure around all.
Yeah, because if not, the only thing that would happen is we will pay a buyout. The mandate is, if you can't meet the mandate with sustainable aviation fuel, you can pay to get out of that commitment.
Right. So fares go higher.
Fares go higher, and innovation goes elsewhere.
Are fares going to go higher anyway? Is the shift to sustainable aviation fuel inflationary?
Probably, but we're only talking about 10% sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. So in the mix, on a weighted average, it's not going to make a tremendous difference to the price of fuel. It's really the kerosene that will determine that. But my point is, the government should come clean. Does it want to have a thriving, sustainable aviation fuel industry in this country? If the answer is yes, they need to do what I call also supply-side economic support, price certainty for the new investors coming in. If they don't, That's okay as well. We'll act accordingly, but we must.
So you'll act accordingly. So how will you, if
We'll
the UK doesn't do it, what happens to the way you do business?
It will be imported, or there'll be a buyout mechanism. Like I said, fares go up, innovation goes elsewhere, production goes elsewhere. And it's not a surprise. If you look where the production is, or is going to be, 60% in the United States and 20% in Europe. The the UK announced 5 plants. None of them are in permit. And they were targeted to be open in 2025. That's just around the corner. It's not going to happen.
Yep. In terms of the technology that we're going to use, sort of the various stages, do you want to be involved in the first stage? Maybe part of the problem is that actually the real value is not in that initial black line at the bottom there. It's in the next phases. So how do you think about, but they are different types of, the processes are different.
We're talking now risks, right?
Yeah.
But Virgin Atlantic is a leader. We've taken a leadership position in aviation. 15 years ago, we did the first biofuel flight.
Yep.
It wasn't at this scale, of course. It was blended in with kerosene. So we know that we lead from the front. And by leading from the front, we don't think that we should take a second mover position. We think that we should show the world how to get aviation into a position where it shouldn't be a choice between green or growth, flying or enjoying, traveling to see the world or staying at home for a staycation, which is, by the way, very good, but other people want to explore the world.
A lot of people do want to explore the world at the moment, and they want to sit at the front of the plane, and they want to enjoy themselves, but their carbon footprint as a result of that is significantly higher. Does that tell me that the consumer, the flying public, actually cares less about their carbon footprint than maybe we first
Okay, now we're going to philosophical questions.
I
will answer. Philosophical questions about what motivates people and what are they willing to sacrifice in the grand scheme of a significantly warmer planet. And I think a lot of people will take action. But I don't think that progress has ever been stopped. So to say, from now on, we're not flying. Well, go figure out how this conference does not happen. Bloomberg does not happen. The UK economy does not happen. So I don't believe in going back. It just doesn't work. And I think it's a very complicated topic. Aviation, rightly or wrongly, is the poster child for...
That's really what I'm getting at.
CO2.
Yep.
And I think it's our job to show that we can do this sustainably. And I think that the consumers will discriminate between those that care and act and those that just talk or don't care, talk at all even.
There is this whole kind of idea that the industry is promoting green options that aren't really green. How do
Greenwashing.
Yes. How do you avoid greenwashing? How do you make this real? You're going to fly to the other side of the Atlantic using sustainable aviation fuel. That's great, but that's a one-off. How does the industry actually deliver upon this? Are the 2050 targets, you've set them, and this is what I think could be the ultimate greenwashing. There are 2050 targets that have been set for this industry to be carbon neutral. Are they achievable?
So that's a lot to unpack. So are the 2050 goals achievable? Yes, I believe they are achievable. Are they extremely hard to do? Yes. Is aviation one of the 7 hard-to-abate industries in the world?
Yep.
Cement, shipping? Yes. We have 2030 targets. The 10% was chosen. So 10% sustainable aviation fuel by 2030.
10%?
10%. It was chosen because if you get to 20%, surely you can get to 20 and 30. That's really the point of this. How do you know that we're not greenwashing? I'm here. Hold me to account. Everything we do is now with a very clear lens of sustainability. Why? We are a purpose-led business. We say we want to be the most loved travel company. And sustainably profitable, by the way. And when you judge who is the most loved travel company, it comes with a great responsibility to our people, the communities which we serve, and the planet which we live on. Those are the things that matter to Virgin Atlantic, to Richard Branson, to Shai, and every single member of our team. And we do this every day. Now, are we perfect? Far from it. Is it really hard to do? Yes. But if we don't set this audacious goal, we're never going to get there.
But you are telling the consumer, this is what we're doing.
Yes.
These are our targets. Does it matter if you're 10 years out?
First of all, I think you know me by now. I don't like missing targets.
Okay.
So let's start with that. Is it okay to miss targets? I would say risk to learn from your failures to improve to improve. Am I going to fail? Undoubtedly on this journey, there's a lot of risks and tremendous amount of failure. If we don't try, we don't put the capital, we bought the...
But is this in your control? So okay, let's go back.
I wish.
No. But in all seriousness, this is an industry that has made a lot of commitments that is going to rely on better engines.
Yes.
Which is a huge challenge. I just got back from the Paris Air Show. They are reaching the limits, of what they can achieve with the current engine technology. So they're going to change the engine technology. We're going to have kind of open rotor. There's all kinds of different ideas that are being discussed at the moment. So you're going to need better engines that are going to be more efficient and are going to consume less fuel. Kind of in your control, depending on which engines you buy, which aircraft you buy. You've got a very efficient fleet, so that's a good first step. You're relying on the fuel industry to deliver, and you're relying on the government to provide the incentives for all of this to happen. You're a passenger here, aren't you? How do you influence what is going to happen here? You're going to buy the most efficient airplanes. You are going to try and fly the most efficient routes. But how much of this is actually in your control?
No, this is one of the 7 hard-to-abate industries in the world. It requires radical collaboration. There is not a single body on Earth that can solve this on their own. You highlighted part of the equation. We need governments, we need international bodies, but we've been committed to this for a very long period of time. Indeed, we put our money where our mouth is. We have the youngest fleet across the Atlantic, 6.7 years. We've spent billions in ensuring we have those planes. We've reduced our carbon footprint by 35% over the past decade. We encourage every airline in the world to put more money into new fuels. Indeed, long-haul travel will rely on fuel. It's not going to be hydrogen or electricity for the foreseeable future. So first, buy the best planes. Second, make sustainable aviation fuel your number one commitment. Work around, that's 90% of the emissions of an airline, and then work around everything else. How do we make this happen? We do exactly this. We put ourselves forward, win the competition, show what's possible, talk about it, take it very seriously, and then start influencing. This is a big problem, but it's a multi-party, radical collaboration. Not one individual, one company, one country can solve it on their own.
But if you get left behind, you get left behind for good?
Virgin Atlantic is not going to be left behind.
No, the UK.
Oh, the UK. I wasn't sure where you were alluding here, because we're leading from the front. I think there is look, what are the revolutions we're seeing around us? We're seeing AI, flavor of 2023, for good reason. The green revolution is another one, and actually because of what has happened, unfortunately, in this world, the defense industry is rising. These 3 industries are moving forward at pace. The scale of the issue we're facing is as big, if not bigger, than the Industrial Revolution. I do think that if you lead, you have a first mover advantage. You get to shape things, you get to try, you get to move people forward, you get to create 10,000 jobs in the United Kingdom, you get to make sure that the amazing universities and the talent that we have, the human capital here, is put to good use. So I do think that if all the capacity is going away, I'm not saying that the UK will be the leader in sustainable aviation fuel, but surely it should have some domestic production of this important thing. And if not, we will adapt just like anything else.
So the message to Rishi Sunak is what?
I would say I'm glad that Minister Shapps, who I know very well, is in charge of the net zero office. I think this is an opportunity. We will emerge from the pandemic, and the inflation will come down eventually, and interest rates will hover on normal levels. This is an opportunity to basically create the beginning, or not the beginning, we're already leaders in that. Take the Industrial Revolution of this opportunity and problem and put a lot of effort at the Prime Minister level, at the funding level, at the Treasury level, and make the UK lead. That's it. And people will vote for that, I'm sure of that.
Okay. We will leave it there. Shai Weiss, thank you very much indeed. Oh, we're done. This way. This way. This way.
Please welcome to the stage David Craig, co-chair of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures.
Good afternoon. I read something pretty depressing yesterday in the FT. It was published by the World Resources Institute that 2022, the amount of deforestation in primary forests increased by 10% in 2022, despite all of the promises and commitments that we would stop deforestation. And it said that every minute 11 football pitches were destroyed. In fact, in 2022, it calculated that the size of Switzerland had been removed in terms of natural primary forests. So in this chat for 10 minutes about inside TNFD, we're going to lose 110 football pitches of forest. You'd have all read the World Wildlife Fund report on nature that said that in our lifetimes, 50 years for me, we've eradicated 69% of all living animals and species in the planet. And before we think this is just something that happens in the Southern Hemisphere or in these protected areas, everyone in this room, if you believe the averages, will produce 80 kilograms of plastic waste this year. That's about my weight of plastic. It'll go into our rivers, our landfills, our oceans. It'll even go into our bloodstreams. So we have an issue. And these natural systems that we're using and resourcing and depleting are not just there for beauty and for preservation, they're a fundamental part of our industrial, our production, our food, our clothing, and our economic systems as well. We know that we are totally dependent on these economic and environmental services for pretty much everything that we do. But this is not just a conversation about conservation, this is a conversation about the financial system. And the financial system that we've all grown up in, I've grown up in, has done us tremendous good in the last 200 years. Building structures, economies, infrastructures, housing, jobs, all of those great things, but it has a flaw at the moment. And that flaw is pretty simple. It gets rewarded for depleting and using resources. It prices the natural assets that they rely on at zero. So imagine if we had a financial system that priced the most important asset class that we have, which is our natural system. Imagine if it priced that not at zero, but took into account the full prices that were there. And that really is the goal of the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, a task force that is global, that I lead, that has over 1,100 members, a design team representing $20 trillion. How do we take into account natural assets and the dependencies and the impacts that we have, and how do we redirect financial investment away from things that harm nature and into nature-positive outcomes? But we can't be singularly focused on climate. What we know is that Mother Nature invented the planet where climate and nature are integrated together. They're part of the same system. Yet we have teams and programs and task force called Climate Here and Nature Here. We have to think about this in a holistic way. And that's why we, at the TNFD, borrowed, copied, reused the TCFD and created something that is an integrated framework that addresses the issue that climate change can actually only be addressed if we harness Mother Nature, and that in fact a lot of the risks and issues from climate change are impacting the natural system itself. If you read the report from the IPCC, they said very clearly that the contributing factor of changing how we use land, preserve forests, agriculture, food, all of these natural areas would contribute at least a third of all of the reduction of emissions that we need to make by 2030. In fact, they estimated that it would contribute more than 11 times electrifying the entire transportation industry, 11 times. Yet where's the money going? Is the money going into electrification of vehicles, which is great, or is it going into protecting our natural system? We know the answer to that. And the question is, how do we fix it? And people say, well, David, we really support this, but it's very complicated. Nature is complicated. It's too many metrics. How do you measure it? There's no single target. So this is what we've been doing. We've been breaking down the complexity to make this simpler. So we decode nature. We subdivide it into 4 realms: the atmosphere, freshwater, oceans, and earth, and 34 biomes. How do I, as a company or an investor, think about the area of land or water that I'm using and characterize it by the ecosystem services that are very location-specific to nature? This is not like climate. Nature is about location. How do I then look at my business and my investments and think about those ecosystem services and dependencies that I have, and how do I decode it? We published this 2 years ago. It's based on science. It's been really well received, and it's now being used in the over 200 pilots that we have around the world on TNFD. And then people said, but it's complicated to do this. How do I go through my portfolio? How do I go through my business and really understand it? We created a methodology. We call it LEAP: locate, evaluate, assess, prepare. Stepping through the process of looking at my business, where am I operating, or where is my portfolio, and understanding the specifics of what I'm doing, the dependencies I might have on, say, water or pollination or land use, and the impacts that I might be having, and how those turn into either risks or opportunities. And people, of course, say, well, that's great, but there's not enough data. There's petabytes of data on the natural system. We actually set up a data catalyst. There are more low-orbit satellites monitoring Earth than ever before. We have companies creating digital twins of areas of land. They can tell you the water use. They can model how carbon is being absorbed, how the fertility of the land is changing. We have tools like eDNA, which can look at DNA samples from a river and tell you what's actually happening upstream. There are hundreds of companies, many of which have been doing this for 30 years and many of which 30 months. Are they all joined up and connected? Is it very easy to navigate this? No. But that's part of the missions of the TNFD, to connect this data more easily and make it easier for you to navigate through it. But the excuse that says there's not enough data is really unfounded now. It's not perfect, but it's there, and our pilot testing has proven that you can use it. And then let's talk about targets and metrics. People said to me, what's the 1.5 degree for nature? Well, there isn't a 1.5 degree for nature. It's too complex to do that. But there are a set of targets and there are a set of metrics that the scientists have informed us are the most important to use. We found thousands of metrics on data. There are many out there, but we've boiled this down to 14 essentially. Let's integrate nature and climate, reuse the TCFD. But then let's look at land, freshwater change and use change. Let's look at pollution removal or pollution creation. Let's look at resource replenishment, and then let's translate that into risks and opportunities. So what we're doing at the TNFD, some think it's about disclosures, and yes, disclosures are involved, but really it's about putting the most valuable asset class that the financial system, the planet, and the world has at the heart of the financial system, and trying to make sure that we stop treating it as a free resource because we're learning it no longer is, trying to ensure we harness all the resources for climate and nature together. These are integrated problems with an integrated solution, and trying to ensure that we redirect financial flows away from those harmful areas into the areas that are more nature positive. Let's hope in a year's time the headline will not be a 10% increase in deforestation and an increase in plastics, but we'll start to see at long last the financial market redirecting capital to start reducing some of those areas. Thank you very much. Meg, apparently I have 14 seconds for questions.
I do not have any. Yeah.
No?
No.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Please welcome to the stage Ulrich Fugmann, co-head of the Environmental Strategies Group at BNP Paribas Asset Management, and Timothée Jola, head of ESG Development, Advocacy, and Special Operations at Amundi, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Adeline Diab.
Hello everyone. So we'll kickstart because I know we want to take most of our time. So ESG has had quite tumultuous time over the past 18 months to 2 years with the geopolitical context, whether it's the energy prices skyrocketing, the cost of living crisis, inflation, the US-China decoupling risk. So with that, I'd like to first start with a question to Ulrich. And well, do you think in this geopolitical context, have you seen whether ESG has become secondary given the other crises the world is facing?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me today. I think that's probably been the case a little bit as we went into the European energy crisis and where priorities somewhat changed and had to change from decarbonization efforts to energy security, and with Europe having closed down a bunch of nuclear, with a great dependence of gas from Russia, I think the need to continue to be able to power homes and supply energy in a secure and safe way, while we had to turn up the pipes, unfortunately, for both gas and coal. So I think that has been the case somewhat, but ESG never goes out of fashion. I think those concerns are still there, even if there was an increased use of coal and gas. But I think there is something to be said about that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Timothy, can I ask you whether the context has had what kind of implication it had on your business strategy and your ESG strategy internally?
Well, when the crisis started, we had a thorough discussion with our CEO and our management, and I mean, she asked us the same question. Well, the case we made at the time was that we're here in the long run, so you have to think about what's going to happen right now, tomorrow, in the short term, but also what's going to happen in the medium term and in the long term. And if anything, everything you described, we believed at the time, was actually supportive of sustainability objectives at EU level and at global level in the long run. So if you want, the strategic positioning and thinking was there, and we kept it. And I think that with insight, it's really fair to say that with this alignment between energy security and energy transition objectives, if anything, it has accelerated EU journey and perhaps the journey that we see on global markets. So that's one. But we also went through a tumultuous phase on the regulatory front. So that's something we had to deal with. And I guess that called for clarification. Number one, how do you position ESG within your value proposition? And second, also, what level of transparency you provide vis-a-vis your investors, prospective clients. And here the motto really was, say what you do what you say. And then we felt we were in a kind of like safe space, really well positioned to benefit from long-term strategic moves.
So to summarize, I think your points, which I think many of us may agree with, is that despite the conflict, and even if we add to this the US political backlash, which have weighed on performance of ESG, which have weighed on flows, they were down 60% in 2022. At the same time, decarbonization has accelerated and probably progress happened over the past year, 18 months, that we thought were going to happen over a decade, possibly. So we are in a momentum where, based on some of our analysis and market sentiment analysis, we are seeing a very strong rebound. And it's possibly because, despite the crisis, multiple crises, it may have actually reinforced the value proposition of ESG. But it has also invited much more scrutiny and regulation. And with regulation on the rise, I guess I'll take a few minutes. I'm sure everybody knows what SFDR is, but just in case, I need to take 30 seconds to say what it is. So SFDR is obviously in Europe one of the regulations, part of the EU Commission, that is setting the framework to how asset managers should classify their products. And there are three kind of categories at the moment. Article 6, where ESG is not really core. Article 8 is where an investor will take into account ESG, but also non-ESG traits. So fundamental characteristics with an ESG part of their investment process. And then Article 9 being obviously the dark green, but it's not just about climate, where ESG is a core objective of a fund investment strategy. So with that, I'd like to turn to Ulrich, who runs a leading Article 9 fund, a multi-billion Article 9 fund, which is very successful. So could you maybe tell us what does it mean to you, especially with the recent change in revision of this regulation?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started the Environmental Strategies Group at BNP Paribas Asset Management, it was to do something that we felt really wasn't out there, and that was to create a fund that was focused on solutions, environmental solutions. And the first way to do that was actually to start with, one, not having a benchmark. Think as we start with an MSCI World, MSCI ACWI, you immediately create a constraint on your investment strategy in the sense that you're trying to mimic what's going on in global markets. And what does global markets represent? Tech, retail, oil and gas, metals and mining, all sorts of stuff. So what we started doing was a fund that was exclusively investing in enabling technologies. And I think we can come in on what we mean by enabling a little bit later. But that meaning solar, wind, batteries, electric vehicles, smart grids, all of the stuff that the world really needs to decarbonize. And hence, in spirit, the fund was started as an Article 9 fund, although there was no concept of Article 9 at that point in time. And hence, in fact, it's meant very little to us, in regards to how we think about the investment strategy, our objective of the fund, with a very strong sense of both intentionality of trying to avoid emissions across the board as a portfolio, having a material amount of impact in regards to environmental solutions and investing where help is needed. And lastly, being able to monitor that and show the world exactly what the fund does. I think it's been great for the investment community. I think it has created a lot of thought around funds that were previously environmental, but maybe couldn't live up to the requirements that Article 9 has, which is a sustainable objective or carbon emissions objective. And hence, I actually think it's been quite helpful.
Thank you. And Timothy, can I ask you maybe at M&T, how are you aligning your portfolios and your suite of products to net zero?
So perhaps as a segue to your point on Article 6, 8, and 9 and how we position the product, what is critical in terms of Article 9 is to have a sustainable investment objective. So that's the sort of really key characteristics of such product. But then what the regulators added was specific criteria on a line-by-line approach to ensure that each and every investment would contribute to the environmental objectives or social objectives, and they would not be associated with significant harm to other sustainable objectives. So that's what was the evolution in the regulation that we had to deal with over the past 2 years. And so on our side, we felt that created a bit of uncertainty to the extent that the regulation was not very prescriptive in terms of what do they mean, do not invest into companies that are associated with negative externalities. So we decided to reposition many products into Article 8, but the investment objectives remain the same. And so I think like among industry players adopted different strategies and gradually we'll see some convergence, but perhaps there was a miss on the regulator's part. And And a key also point that we discussed extensively with the regulators was how we could position net zero product. And thinking about net zero product in the light of the regulatory categories that you mentioned, it's about having a sustainable investment objective to actually meaningfully contribute to net zero objectives and related objectives, notably like nature, biodiversity, and the rest. So that's one. But it's also investing into the economy to support companies, industries, and players that are gradually transitioning to business models that are compatible with 1.5 degrees, even though we know that's a far-fetched objective. So we think about net zero through this double lens, if you want. There is a set of category and products that are really meant to be concentrated and to make high conviction bets into project companies that are enabling the world to transition, but we also want to develop, and we are developing a suite of products that are meant to invest into the broad economy across sector, across regions, and we make sure that they keep their exposure to high climate impact sector, because these are the sectors that we need to transition in a very fast way. And within these sectors, we favor the companies that are most advanced or that are catching up. And so that's how we think about net zero. But then, of course, that's in line with what the EU regulation expects, but that's in line with what our clients expect. We have binding characteristics which are described in the investment policy or objectives of the fund. That's what SFDR brought. Some players were doing it. Now all players have to do it. If you promote characteristics, they need to be binding. They need to be described in the pre-contractual documentation.
Absolutely. And I'd like to come back to a point you just mentioned, which is the initial, or where people are, or where most market, or what happened recently is that Article 8 has become, unfortunately, given the regulation and the uncertainty around the regulation, a sort of catch-all. You will have in that category very much leading funds that embed ESG across the entire investment process from the A to Z, with deep analysis, even in the trading strategy. Yet you will also have funds that don't look at ESG at all, may have a score at the end of the process, a check mark, and that's it. Yet they are presented as Article 8. Both can be justified under the current regulation. So this is becoming an issue because now it's out of 11 trillion AUM that are SFDR labeled 6, 8, or 9, over 50% now are Article 8. You have 6 trillion. Article 9 are 400 billion, yet, and Article 6 is the rest. So basically, Article 8, the regulator may need to look into how to help investors, clients navigate that space. So can I ask maybe both of you or each of you for maybe what would be, because there has been some frustration with the regulator, although the ambition is welcome and they are tackling the uncertainty very well. Recently, they added climate funds being eligible to, re-eligible to classify as Article 9. But what would be your 1 or 2 recommendation to the regulator, if you could just ask?
I think a little bit like ESG has been weaponized, and I think we've learned that we, in a way, need to move a little bit beyond ESG, that ESG is not necessarily a sign of goodness or badness, and it's certainly not a noun. You know, it frustrates me when people are talking about an ESG fund. We conduct discounted cash flow analysis till we're blue in the face, and we don't call ourselves a DCF fund. And hence, ESG is it's a process. It's not a thing. And I think it's a little bit like net zero. So I think, you know, if a retail investor goes in and buys a net zero fund, they think, well, probably buying something that's doing good. And there, I think what we're missing a little bit is a differentiation between who's an enabler and who's an adopter. And maybe I should explain that. If you're producing tennis rackets, and you're doing so producing a little bit less carbon every single year, you can have a business that's net zero aligned. Does the world need more tennis rackets? I'm not sure. I'm a big fan of tennis, but I'm not sure. But still, that goes under the label of being net zero. Now, the world needs more solutions. We need more solar. We need more wind. We need more batteries, etc. And it's very little institutional participation we see in those types of companies because they're quite volatile. They move. Guess what? Innovation moves. And we need money and investors and capital and asset managers to take some risk and provide that support for companies. So I would, my plea, I think, would be, to get to the point, have a greater differentiation within portfolios, a very simple measure. How much of your portfolio is adopting, as in producing tennis rackets with a little bit less carbon every year, and how much of your portfolio is actually enabling, providing a solution to the tennis racket company that needs to decarbonize. And I think you'd get a really interesting picture out of that.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, I would second what you said, and actually the net zero solution I was alluding to, be it passive or active, actually we kept that as Article 8 because they're meant to invest into the broad economy. And we felt that the natural positioning of Article 9 was about investing solely into the companies that are actually making a meaningful difference. But actually what you were describing is coming from the fact that at the Commission level and European Supervisory Authority level, they haven't really made up their mind whether it was a transparency regime or a labeling regime. And so our one big ask is choose. And then we're going to adapt. And the entire industry is going to adapt. But we cannot be in the middle and having some provisions that are leaning towards one side and other that are leaning towards the other side. So that's one ask. Second, adapt the level of transparency requirements to the target asset classes and the realities of the investment universes that we deal with. Taking one example, the sustainable investment concept, which is at the core of an Article 9, it requires to do a full-fledged DNSH test. That requires having access to robust and reliable data. Can we use that investing into frontier markets, into less developed middle income economies? Well, maybe we could, but that's a regulatory risk. And you need really not to lose sight about what are the initial objectives of the regulation. First objective, making the markets more transparent, increasing the level of integrity. There was one. But there was a second objective, which is about really mobilizing capital market to support the financing of sustainable development objectives and climate objectives. They were doing so in a way that is compatible with the duties of an asset manager because they had the premises that EU savers, they had huge appetite for sustainable product. We think that's true. We just need to make it work. But it's really about rethinking the provisions of the law with the benefits of experience to ensure that you serve the initial objectives of the regulation.
Thank you. And I guess maybe one other question then for you on the regulatory side. At the moment, and please do comment if you have one, but at the moment the regulators are mostly focused on disincentivizing the market from investing in fossil fuel or coal or taxing plastic, et cetera, which is obviously very good. But at some point, and maybe coming back to a point you were making in terms of that differentiation, is also perhaps how can we incentivize and have a more of a, like the IRA is a very good example, but that's one example, but having a suite of regulations that are more about incentivizing the market, whether it's investors or companies. Any comments or thoughts about that?
Well, I'm sure you're going to have a lot more like smarter things to say on this than I can, but just to give you my 2 cents. Number one, there are still a lot of incentives that are going to the fossil fuel industry.
So correcting those, for example.
And just like correcting that, and we understand there is a question of like, purchasing power in many economies, and it's something that you need to factor in nevertheless. If we want to be serious about accelerating our climate journey, we need to address that, and it's significant. I mean, it's 700 billion a year, and the amount that we need to invest in like renewable energy in emerging market, that's 1 trillion. I mean, it's not so far. So just like pulling out these numbers, putting it there, it's not that simple, but that could help a lot. Second, you need probably both. And really, if you talk to the experts that are really analyzing what levers do we have to accelerate the transition, they tell you, well, we have little things at our disposal that can make a marginal difference. And so we don't have the luxury to select only few. You need really to have no stones left unturned. And that's how, because it's a big shift for our societies, for our production systems, and it needs to happen very fast. So you need price signal, you need controls, you need to think about the value chain, and you need all of this, we believe, to make it happen fast.
But one big call I take from this is actually we should have data mapping those incentives to the fossil fuels industries, or much better data, because that could be tackled much better. So, all right.
Well, I think just quickly, I think one headline is just pricing externalities, pricing carbon, pricing natural capital footprints as a start, and that's been an incredibly slow process. And this comes back maybe to me trying to answer 2 questions, one on regulation and one on this, and that is that the fear with regulation and with all the confusion is that we end up using regulation as sort of a little bit as a dummy and go back to sort of the lowest denominator. We can do better and we can do more. And I think what we're trying to do is say, okay, there's a regulatory framework and that's great, and we're Article 9, et cetera. But we need to do more, not just what they tell us to do. We need to do something that actually makes a difference. And this is where the asset management industry, I think, has a huge, huge role to play. It's a matter of public record that we've just been out cornerstoning a big hydrogen company in Europe. I think we need more risk capital like that to go in and take some risk, and say, yeah, we're behind some of these companies that are making solutions, and not just rest on net zero, Paris alignment, Article 9 versus Article 8, et cetera. We can end up getting lost in KPIs and kind of lose the common sense. And the common sense is there's a problem. It needs a solution. In fact, it's very profitable to invest in those solutions. Big growing markets, the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, European Green Deal. This is a very, very attractive, interesting area to invest in, and probably the mega trend of the next couple of decades. So it's a win-win.
Thank you. Because we have only 1 minute left, I'm going to have to skip a question, but I hope you weave it in one of your answers. So in the minute we have left, can I please ask each of you to share with us what are you the most optimistic about, and what would be your vision to happen in the next 3 years, whether for ESG or climate? And hopefully in that answer, you can weave in maybe a bit more comments about what you mentioned before, which I really loved, adopters versus enablers.
Please.
You can take a minute.
All right, I have 15 seconds,
Yeah,
and then you
I'll
have
take those
the
15.
5 left. No, I think in 3 years down the road, we will have made a lot more progress understanding how the Earth system works. And that's on very, very high level, but this is where the economic materiality is actually. Climate and CO2 budget is one planet boundaries. Actually, there are others. And we underestimate the impact of climate because we don't understand very well how climate will impact the other planet boundaries. And taken all together, we're talking about 50% of the world GDP. So the impact, it's going to be massive if we don't do what is needed. We understand better the negative feedback loops at play, but we also understand better the positive feedback loops. And I think 3 years down the road, we will see more comprehensive set of policies integrating the issue of climate with the issue of nature, with the other planet boundaries, and impact solution actually really favoring and supporting the solution that take all of this into consideration.
Thank you. Love it.
Well, I would say 15 seconds. Let's move beyond ESG. We can do more. Let's continue to integrate it. Let's use it as a process. Second, net zero is important, but let's invest in what makes sense, common sense. And in terms of themes and areas where we see incredible amount of opportunity over the next 3 years, areas like hydrogen, residential solar, energy storage that will really break up the intermittency that we see in renewables. Very, very optimistic for the next 3 years.
With that, thank you very much, everybody. And thank you to both our speakers. And I'll leave it back to everyone.
Thanks.
Please welcome to the stage Andrew Grant, Head of Intelligent Mobility at Bloomberg NEF.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Andrew. I work for Bloomberg NEF, which is Bloomberg's decarbonization arm. So one of the things we do every year is we take a good hard look at the electric vehicle industry and how that might impact road transport for the coming decades. That's compiled in our electric vehicle outlook report, which I'll be telling you about today. The way we go about doing that is we look at all the trends around electrification, shared mobility, autonomous driving, and consumer behavior, and other factors like demographic shifts, urbanization changes, and economic growth. This gives us a bit of an idea about how different segments within road transport might evolve, so things like passenger cars and 2- and 3-wheelers. Once we've established that baseline, we are able to draw some conclusions around the impacts that this could have on some very big and noteworthy markets, obviously the automotive industry, but also the power sector and the oil sector, and some sectors that are just starting to be developed, such as the battery and charging infrastructure industries. We do this with 2 different scenarios. One you can think of as our base case, the economic transition scenario. This is basically just following economic trends. It assumes no major policy interventions. And then we have our net zero scenario. This, we plot a course to a zero tailpipe emissions capable fleet by 2050. Now, before I get into talking about the future, let me just share some numbers that set the picture today. So the rate of electrification varies significantly based on the types of vehicles that you're talking about. If you're talking about vans and trucks, in 2022, only 3% of the vehicles sold were electric. That's up to 14% for passenger cars. For buses, that's significantly higher at about 38%. And then 2- and 3-wheelers, just under half of all the 2- and 3-wheelers sold globally last year were electric vehicles. So with that, I'm going to talk about some of the main takeaways from our report. To start off, if you're looking at the near term, by 2026, you're selling nearly 27 million electric vehicles globally. China is over half of this amount, but as a share of the total passenger vehicle market, Europe is fairly close to the total in China. This does mean that the best days of the internal combustion engine do appear to be behind us. From the highs of 2017, there doesn't really seem to be a route back for internal combustion engine vehicle sales. The growth in the passenger vehicle market seems to be coming from electric drivetrains. Looking a bit further out to 2040, according to our modeling, around 3 out of every 4 passenger vehicles sold will be electric vehicles. And by that I mean a battery electric or a plug-in hybrid vehicle. Again, China is the biggest market for these vehicles. But if you look at the chart on the right, you'll see a significant difference between markets in the 2030 timeframe, with places like China and Europe in kind of the 60 to 70% of their passenger vehicle sales being electric, whereas markets like Southeast Asia and India being far lower in the 10 to 15% range by 2030. Now, these vehicle sales are one thing, but it takes a while for vehicle sales to turn over the fleet that's on the road. So it takes a longer time for the fleet itself to electrify. By 2040, under half of the global passenger vehicle fleet is electric. And again, note the significant differences across markets, particularly the markets where it takes a long time to get those first few sales and for that fleet to really start turning over. This doesn't mean net zero is impossible. Peak, according to our modeling, emissions from road transport peak in 2029 and decline from there. But by 2050, road transport still accounts for 4 gigatons of CO2 emissions annually. If you're a policymaker and you're looking at where to go about closing this gap, you can start by, bless you, you can start by segmenting the vehicle types. 2 and 3 wheelers are pretty close to our net zero scenario. Same thing for buses. Some policy intervention would be required, but it won't necessarily need to be a massive shift. Cars and light commercial vehicles, and by that I mean vans and delivery vehicles, those still need some significant policy intervention. But where the most attention is required is heavy duty and long haul commercial vehicles, where regulators should be spending most of their time to close what is looking to be a very significant gap between our economic transition scenario and the net zero scenario. Regulators should also not be forgetting about the power sector, which is further along the journey to decarbonization at this stage, but needs to keep going to keep pace with road transport, which will be catching up by 2050. In an ideal solution, both these numbers keep heading to 100%. The really good news, and since we're at the Sustainable Business Summit here, is that this is a massive economic opportunity. Over $8 trillion in our economic transition scenario by 2030, climbing to nearly $57 trillion by 2050. The bulk of this opportunity lies in passenger vehicles. Commercial vehicles are a big chunk of this, but passenger vehicles are a 1.4 billion vehicle fleet. There are a lot of consumers that are willing to spend money on their vehicles, and it will take a long time to switch over the fleet to an electric drivetrain. So where does this investment go? Well, one of the areas is in battery manufacturing. Now, there have been a lot of announcements around battery manufacturing scaling up in recent years. Nearly $59 billion pledged to battery manufacturing just last year. According to our modeling, this is more investment than in battery manufacturing, and by that I mean the cells and the main components that go into batteries, than you'd actually need in any model, in any version of our scenario in any year all the way out to 2040. This seems to indicate that that battery manufacturing itself won't be an issue in the electric vehicle supply chain. This is very different from the raw material and the battery metal side of things, where there may be more bottlenecks. Metals like lithium could be, in our net zero scenario, scale up 22 times in their demand. Other more common metals and like copper also experience significant increase in demand in our modeling. Oil demand peaks in our modeling in 2027 for road transport and from all other sources by 2029. There's still significant demand from other sectors, so your petrochemicals and the like, all the way out to 2050. But the peak oil timeframe appears to be quite soon. So as you electrify the vehicle fleet, you do end up pulling more from the power sector and increasing the burdens on those sectors. This can be in the region of 12 to 14% by 2050 in additive electricity demand. But if you look at the other sectors that also want to electrify, electric vehicles can end up being just a similarly small chunk even of electricity demand, even in our net zero scenario. This is because of sectors like heating and cooling and industrialization, electrification of industry that end up also wanting to draw on the power sector to reduce their emissions. And this can vary significantly by market, but generally across most markets, our economic transition scenario has a higher share of electricity demand for attributable to passenger vehicles than what you might see in the net zero scenario. So one interesting trend that's happening in the industry is how battery packs just seem to keep getting bigger and bigger. Earlier this week, GM announced a vehicle that has a roughly 200 kilowatt hour battery pack. The global average is around 60 kilowatt hours, up from about 40 kilowatt hours in 2018. If this trend continues and battery packs keep getting larger and larger, that's only adding to some of the battery supply chain issues that are already starting to crop up across the sector. So EV price parity and battery supply chain issues. One thing we do is we track battery prices with an annual survey that looks at various battery segments across the industry. And for the first time last year, we saw an increase in battery pack prices. Some of this has come from supply chain and management issues. Some of this has come from raw material prices spiking and moving around. But it has been a challenging time for those price increases. If battery packs keep getting bigger, that some of these issues could only increase. One part of our modeling process is to take this price trend and map that going forward and answer the question that we often get asked about: when will electric vehicles be cheaper than internal combustion engine vehicles? And the answer to that really is, it depends. It depends on where you are, it depends on the types of vehicles that are deployed in that region, and it depends on the type of vehicle that you're buying. The popularity of SUVs and SUVs increasing in demand, and the number of battery electric SUV variants that are being introduced is increasing, and luckily those are some of the segments that are earliest to reach price parity in our modeling. And then there's some other trends that could upset the battery industry or make things much better for the industry. So one of those is the development of solid-state batteries. Now, this is a technology type that has been promised for a long time, but progress does seem to be being made. Many of these manufacturers of different types of solid-state batteries have passed the pilot production stage. They've validated and certified their products, and now are looking to scale up and commercialize and produce at scale. Those types of batteries will mostly be for high-end and premium vehicles and work their way down to other vehicles. But a different battery technology that is starting from the other end of the spectrum and will first impact the cheapest and entry-level vehicles is sodium-ion batteries. Now, this technology is also, again, very new and is only starting to be commercialized, but it could potentially have a significant impact on the battery supply chain, reducing the demand for some of those core lithium-ion battery components. I mentioned the challenges around heavy-duty trucking and how that might develop going forward. But in our modeling, there are challenges around grid connectivity and matching up the type of charging that you need for long-haul trucking and heavy-duty trucking journeys. In our total cost of ownership modeling, which basically gives you a number for how much it costs per kilometer to operate a commercial vehicle, it seems like battery electric vehicles become cost competitive with many of the diesel counterparts by 2030 in some of the biggest and earliest adopters of the technology in the geographies which adopt some of the technologies the earliest. It's also worth noting that fuel cell vehicles remain, for the most part, and there will be some exceptions to this, more expensive than both diesel and internal combustion counterparts and battery electric counterparts all the way out to 2030. And then finally, I want to talk about autonomous vehicles, or AVs. Now, this is a bit of a divisive topic. Everybody's got a decent opinion about this. But whether you believe there's a very big future for robotaxis and automated vehicles on our roads or not, what I'm here to tell you is that it's not possible to sit on the fence and have a decent understanding about how the road transport sector might evolve going forward. Whether they are robotaxis or not will massively impact the number of vehicles that you need on the roads. It'll impact the rate at which you sell vehicles and the rate at which the passenger vehicle fleet turns over. You could be looking at, in our low AV scenario, a passenger vehicle fleet that is smaller than what it is today, roughly around 1 billion vehicles, or you could be looking at something that's 1.8 billion vehicles. That has massive impacts across the entirety of the supply chain. It can affect things like, as you'll see on the chart on the right, the charging infrastructure businesses, which in our high autonomous vehicle adoption scenario need around 200 million fewer home chargers than in our low autonomous vehicle scenario. And that's just by replacing them with around 1 million high-speed chargers that are, in theory, well deployed and managed across an intelligent connected fleet. So I've whipped through all of those really quickly, but those are some of the main takeaways from our electric vehicle outlook reports. Thank you all for your time.
Please welcome to the stage Hakim Daouda, CEO of the Sovereign Wealth Fund for the Gabonese Republic, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Jennifer Zabasaja.
Hakim, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You've had quite the journey.
It was.
A little bit. So we don't have too much time, but I thought we could start with just, talking about Gabon a little bit for people who may not know just how vital it is to this planet and to a lot of the efforts that people in this room are doing. So I saw there was, Gabon was referred to as the lungs of Africa.
Yes.
And I thought that was a really interesting way to describe it. Can you tell us why you think that is?
Sure, Jen, and thank you for having me. Really great to be in this magnificent Bloomberg building. Talking about Gabon, Gabon is really unique. It's not because I'm from Gabon, it's the reality. Yeah. We have more than 88% of the country is covered by forest. So which means that today we're the most absorbing country in terms of CO2. Our country, the forest cover of Gabon, absorb 140 million tons of carbon every year. And we have a net emission over all the industries, across all the industry, oil and gas, mining, and all those, of 35 million tons. So we have a net sequestration of 105 million tons of carbon every year. Just to give you a sense of magnitude, it's about a fourth of the UK emission that is being absorbed by the Gabonese forest. And that preservation effort didn't start yesterday. We started it 50 years ago, since 1972. That we embark in the stewardship of the nature. Back in 1998, we put 12% of our landmass, we classified it under protected reserve. So we have 13 national parks across the country. Then we went on in 2010, we banned the export of raw logs. And and you have to bear in mind that before we discovered oil, the timber industry was our highest income earner. But yet we did decide to ban the export of raw log, and we enforced the processing of timber locally. So we were able to move through the value chain and improve the livelihood of the workers. So we moved an industry of $250 million to a $1 billion industry 10 years after.
And you say Gabon is not net zero, it's...
Oh, we passed net zero, we sub-zero.
Sub-zero.
So, while some countries are trying to achieve Paris Agreement and they're committing to reach net zero by 2050, we're committing to never go above zero.
Well, and talk about, because the last time, for people who don't know this, the last time you were on stage with us for a Bloomberg Live event, you had talked about this record issuance that the country was attempting to do with carbon credits. Can you talk about sort of how you got to that stage, why it was that the country felt like this was an important time to issue this?
Yes, and it tied to what I mentioned before. When we started this, we didn't even know that we could make money out of preserving the nature. We just knew that it was the right thing to do to preserve the nature and protect the biodiversity. For instance, we have the largest population of elephant forests in Gabon, more than 70,000 elephant forests. Now, the reality is this protection effort and conservation effort, we've done it on our own budget. So making difficult arbitrage every day between developing our economy or preserving this common good so that we can preserve the ecosystem services for the rest of the world. Obviously, this is a natural asset that has to be monetized somehow, because in a world where a living tree has less value than a cut tree is not sustainable when we're trying to get as close as possible to 1.5 degree. So last year, we issued 90 million tons of carbon credit, RED Plus certified by the UNFCCC. But unfortunately, the way the market is designed today does not really capture the value of standing forest. And this is a mistake, and this is really the danger that is at stake. If we're not addressing the issue of standing forest or matured forest, we will never achieve the 1.5 degree.
You're saying the carbon credit market is flawed?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Because the way the market is designed today, but it's designed for the bad students. Because we're looking at the flux. We're looking at how well you're improving. But as I mentioned at the beginning, we're already below sub-zero. So if there's only incentive to help countries get to zero, what about the countries that are below zero? But the reality is, if we don't design an instrument for this country, they will go above zero at some point. And the numbers are there. You have about 30 high forest, low deforestation countries in the world. So meaning countries that have more than 50% of their land covered by forest. The past 10 years alone, 5 of them flipped, right? They lost their HFLD status. And it's clear, and you can understand why. When you look at the numbers, since 2007, a bit less than $2 billion of climate finance were directed to HFLD countries. $2 billion can sound a lot, but look at the drivers of deforestation. Last year alone, the global timber industry topped up $1 trillion. When you look at the cattle industry in the States last year, was $80 billion. And those are the drivers, and those are the reason why people deforestate. Why do we deforestate, right? Yep. Is to plant crops, to raise cattle, and to cut the timber to sell it. So if we don't equalize this quickly, we will have more and more countries losing the HFLD status. And if we lose these countries, we'll never achieve the 1.5 degrees. So it's important to reduce the emissions, definitely, but it's also important to maintain the base.
So then what would that look like? I mean, what would be the right financial instrument to balance out the carbon credit market for countries like Gabon?
It will be an instrument that allow the money, first of all, that put the right value on that asset, because again, it's an asset. It's an asset that has to be maintained, and an instrument that allow the monetization of it, right? Because the challenge here is not only about conservation and preservation, but it's also how do we induce green growth in those countries? How do we help this country develop a low carbon economy to ensure that they achieve their own SDG goals?
So then what's worked? I mean, we were talking about Paris. Last week, you were in Paris for President Macron's Global Financial Pact, which was in a lot of ways centered around supporting the Global South. Was there anything that came of that was maybe positive in the direction that you're talking about things need to be going?
Let's be optimistic, right? Let's be optimistic. Let's see the glass half full. Yep. We've seen great progress in Paris in the conversation and in the awareness, because obviously if you need to solve a problem, you need first to raise the awareness. Sure. And I think the awareness, people are understanding the critical role that the standing forests are playing in stabilizing climate. Second of all, there was a great announcement for our brother country, which is Senegal, with the JETP. I think it was $2.7 billion of commitment. And now that the fact that they reached to that consensus give hope that maybe we can start working on a similar model but to preserve nature this time around.
So then who initiates that then? And why hasn't that been initiated at this point in time?
Why? I would say that the priority was maybe set on reducing the emissions
Right.
and not enough awareness on the fact that we need to ensure that the carbon sinks remain carbon sinks. Now, I believe this is a conversation that you do have with all the stakeholders. So this is conversation for the next COP, but even before the next COP, this is conversation that we will be continuing on the sideline of the United Nations General Assembly. These are conversations that we'll also be having during the World Bank meetings, where we definitely have to find a way to redesign or reimagine the financial architecture.
Right, and we saw, just to bring up President Macron again, he attempted to do this with an announcement that he actually made while he was in Gabon earlier this year. I believe it was 53 million, right, to support those countries that are not able to benefit from carbon credits. Is that a model that you think could work? Should other countries, should other institutions potentially be looking at something like that?
Again, you mentioned the number, right?
Yeah.
And we're really grateful because at least he made that commitment, and he was in Gabon with the President Ali Bongo Ondimba. But the reality is the magnitude is not up to the challenge and the risk at stake. And again, it was about putting together, working on biodiversity credits, which are clearly and really important. But again, what are the real financial mechanisms that will allow transaction with the required scale and speed?
Do you see the market waiting for something like that, willing to sort of invest in that, or is the focus too much? Has it been too much on carbon credits and the hype around that, I think?
It has been, but we've seen movement. We've
Yeah.
seen great progress. We're seeing the New York Stock Exchange working on listing natural asset companies. We're having conversation on debt for nature swap. We're seeing that there's a couple of initiatives around at the moment that really give us hope that we will be able to conclude on a impactful mechanism.
When do you think you'll start actually seeing movement, though?
We're in movement.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You're saying right now?
We are in movement.
Yeah.
We're having this conversation, and we hope we'll get to something concrete within the next meetings before the end of this year.
And you mentioned UNGA, which is happening in New York, and obviously the World Bank meetings. But when we talk about COP, we were talking backstage. Obviously, it's the big convening of a lot of, global leaders, climate experts. What's your hope for that COP? Because it seems like these events happen, and there's a declaration, and then we just keep talking about it. I mean, what is it that you want to see at COP28 this year?
At COP28 this year, like I mentioned, it's really our objective for COP this year is really to found that mechanism, to have the right parties around the table and find a mechanism where we will start monetizing and putting the right value on standing forests, which is really critical.
How will you know, though, if you're heading in the right direction in terms of delivering that message and making sure that the country is benefiting from that?
Okay, it's in two parts. The first part is we're seeing the traction and we're seeing the momentum.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even between this year and last year, we see how people are more receptive and understand that trying to protect standing forests is not a way to do greenwashing or delaying emission reduction from other countries or corporates. They're really seeing as a complementary element to the whole world achieving 1.5 degree.
Right.
Now, in terms of Gabon, we are very put in our laws, and that's why I was mentioning earlier that it's not only about conservation and preservation, but it's also about how do we create a green growth, right? And as the Sovereign Wealth Fund, we are mandated by the government to monetize that natural capital. And in our finance law, it's already included that not less than 50% of this amount will go back into community empowerment, biodiversity trust fund, and building climate resilient infrastructure for the people of Gabon.
Are you working with other sovereign wealth funds across the continent to push that message forward?
Yes, we're part of Which one? Which message? Because we have to be clear.
Yeah, no, the message of developing the green economies and making sure
sure.
that countries are benefiting from that.
Sure. I mean, Africa has been, in general, not only the Sovereign Wealth Fund, Africa has been leading by example when it comes to low climate solution.
Yeah.
Solution to the climate crisis, I meant to say. When you look at it today, even the world is reaping benefits from it, be it from our indigenous knowledge, our regenerative agriculture, nutritious food systems, or even talking about our sustainable built environment.
But Africa is also, I think people need to realize, Africa is also in a difficult situation because of the lack of development that there's been. There's so many resources, right? There's a lot of oil, there's a lot of natural resources that African countries want to use to develop, but also be a part of the green transition. And so I've found that balance out also really interesting. And I wonder from Gabon's perspective how you balance that and how you look at it.
That's the thing. In Gabon, for us, it's a plus.
Yeah.
It's not either or situation. I can go back to the timber industry, like I mentioned. Today, in Gabon, we have a law where we cut 1 tree every hectare. And it has proven that by doing this sustainable logging, having this sustainable logging policy and system in place, we were able to optimize the carbon capturation of our forest. So actually, we believe that there's a way to continue protecting the forest, but also reaping profit from it.
And then just finally, I mean, what gets in the way of any of this progress that could potentially happen? I mean, what concerns you that could potentially derail any of this progress that you're seeing?
I don't see anything derailing. The worry now, what I'm concerned is about scale and speed.
Yeah.
Would we do it fast enough and with the right scale? But we do need global partnership to ensure that we can unlock technology advancement, to ensure that we can design the right enabling financial instrument, and also that we can tap to a large pool of capital so that we can all achieve this common goal of ours.
I wanted to bring in Meg. Meg, were there any questions from the audience?
Sure, yeah. So as a business leader, what can we do, the business audience? What's their call to action? Yeah.
Okay. The call to action here is, first of all, to really have that clear in mind that the issue of keeping the 1.5 degrees alive goes through maintaining standing forest. So it's really how, first of all, how can you help us design a mechanism that will work for you, and being proactive in it. Because we mentioned the 90 million tons of carbon credit that we had certified. And when we get into conversation, we have sometimes pushbacks in terms of, oh, they're not voluntary carbon market, they don't have this certification, or we don't understand your methodology. Okay, but what are you offering? If we do know that, we agree that we need to conserve this forest. So what can we do together? What instrument can we come together, mutually design to ensure that we reach our common goal?
What kind of governance measures help support the cause?
Sorry?
What kind of governance measures help support your cause?
What type of government measure?
Governance,
measures?
yeah, governance. Like,
Yeah.
how are you regulating it? Yeah.
The fund?
Yes, yeah.
The sovereign wealth fund?
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. I didn't get the
Yeah.
question from the get-go. We do have a board of director, and on top of the board of director, we do have a strategic orientational council, which is headed by the head of state and the president of the 2 chambers, and some executive of the cabinet. And we do report to the parliament as a custodian of wealth of the citizens of Gabon.
Last one. How has the Gabonese private sector contributed towards the country's climate action?
Oh, they do actively, actually, and we've been seeing it from the extractive industries mainly, but it's also because it's been enforced by law in Gabon. So, and to tie back to what I was mentioning earlier, Gabon has been doing this stewardship of the nature and the environment for the past 50 years. So it's really in our DNA. And so it is also something that it infused in our private sector.
Great. Well, Akeem, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for
Thank you,
having
everyone,
me.
for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Which way? Yep.
Please welcome to the stage Tim Brown, co-founder and chief innovation officer of Allbirds, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Akshat Rati.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Akshat Rati, and I'm a host of Zero, the podcast that you can see here. It's from Bloomberg Green. We get guests of all kinds: Bill Gates, Justin Trudeau, Baroness Bryony Worthington. I hope you guys will tune in. But for our guest today, Tim, welcome to Bloomberg.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we are here looking at a shoe, and it's a very special shoe. Tell me more about it.
Allbirds was founded 7 years ago as a B Corp with the environment enshrined in our governance, with a focus on leveraging natural materials to make footwear in a better way. And this is the result of 7 years of innovation in materials, and it's what we believe to be the world's first net zero shoe that we launched yesterday at the Global Fashion Summit in Copenhagen. So it's a very proud achievement for a small, young company.
Now, net zero or carbon neutral, these are terms that are being increasingly used. Obviously, today we are talking at a time when the UK government is being criticized for not being able to stay on track of its own net zero goals. But earlier in the day, we heard about greenwashing claims. The Advertising Standards Agency here is going after companies that are claiming carbon neutral, but then cannot back up those claims. Most of the time, those claims are tied to buying offsets, and that's where they fall apart, because these offsets where you pay somebody to remove the carbon dioxide for you don't always work. You are not using offsets.
Well, there's a lot in what you've just said there.
Yes.
And having just arrived in London today and just zooming back to pick up The Guardian and to see net zero on the cover, and knowing that when we founded the business 7 years ago, even the word sustainability was used infrequently. And fast forward today, it's generally acknowledged as the problem of our generation, but we have an issue around language. Even a word like sustainability means 100 different things to 100 different people. If I asked people in the audience to define this, they might talk about air quality, water quality, they might talk about biodiversity, animal welfare, and we'd all be very confused and probably want to stay in bed. And really, what we need to do is zoom in on a framework. And part of that is regulation.
Yes.
Part of that is conversations like this, and I know you've got lots of opinions on this particular topic as one of the leading voices in the media about it. And part of it is rallying around a strategy, because many of those aspects of sustainability are important, but to go after all of them at the same time is to sometimes have conflicting incentives.
Right.
Carbon is our North Star as a business, which is not to say all the other aspects of sustainability don't matter, but much like calories on food, which is not the totality of a healthy diet, it's a very, very important metric that connects me to you, Bloomberg to Allbirds, the United Kingdom to New Zealand, and all that is up to a number that we need to work together to reduce. Allbirds has been able to boil that down to an on-product carbon footprint, and then work really, really hard to reduce that. And we've done that not with offsets, but with innovation around materials, a dedication to measure and then innovate around the products that we're making. And it's multiple years of effort, and it's one shoe, and quite frankly, it's a good start, but it's not enough.
So a lot of the shoe is made up of wool. You can probably see it from the distance. And the claim around it being carbon neutral is that it is carbon negative wool. Now, what does that mean?
Well, it's a combination of materials, not just the wool. What's interesting as a designer and an innovator is that when you start to apply the lens of carbon to the way that products are created, they start to look different in the same way that an electric car, freed from the constraints of a combustion engine, starts to take on a different form. And so too do these objects. Shoes starting to take on a different form as we leverage and use what is 3 carbon negative materials, which are the foundation of this product. One of them is wool. We've worked very, very closely with our partners in New Zealand called New Zealand Merino. They're an incredibly innovative company that represents 532 farms, 15% of New Zealand's agricultural landmass, just coming out of the Copenhagen Fashion Summit. That's half the size of Denmark, so it's an extraordinary massive land. 2 years ago, none of them wanted to engage with the topic of regenerative agriculture, and now they've signed up en masse because there's increasing consumer demand for lower carbon fibre product from across the fashion industry. And we've been able to leverage that. The fibre in this product is from one particular farm called Lake Hawea Station, somewhat biased, but it's the most beautiful corner of the world. And this farm has worked really, really hard to measure out the gate and consider every aspect of the farm and the ecosystem within the property, with all the biodiversity and the various aspects of how the property works to create fibre that is carbon negative, that allows us to create a net zero product.
And the negative part is coming from the carbon being stored on the activities that are being done on the farm.
Correct, yeah. What we might call within the process of how the farm is run and operated. The cover crops, the way that the fibre is created, so it looks at the whole ecosystem out the gate. Saying wool is a little bit like saying cars. There's a lot of difference between the way that the fibre is produced and how the land is cared for, trees, foliage, how every aspect of the ecosystem of the farm is considered. And this is really, we believe, the future of how we're going to start to create lower carbon products, is to look at each of these properties and incentivize the type of farming behavior that will allow us to make lower carbon products.
Now, you are not just doing a carbon neutral shoe here based on the calculations which you've put out for people to look at, including the design and the details. Do you want others to copy the shoe?
I think I think it's essential. This is a category that makes something like 20 billion pairs of shoes a year. We're one of the few, if not the only, company that consistently labels their products with their carbon footprint. The whole foundation of this Moonshot program, which is really the pinnacle of our innovation effort, is that this suite of materials, this methodology, is open source and available to everyone. So we launched a quite comprehensive, what we're calling a toolkit recipe book for how this shoe was made, with a view that other people will download it, use it, adopt it. I think one of the keys to lower carbon products and innovation broadly in the sector is ushering in a new era of hyper collaboration, of working together, and we hope that this will be a catalyst for doing just that.
And by 2030, you say you're going to be a near zero company on carbon emissions. So every shoe is then going to be a carbon neutral shoe by 2030 for you.
I would just like to thank you for reading in its entirety the 25-page release, which I don't think very few people have done. So yes, as part of our broader environmental plan is a company strategy around the environment and around carbon, which we call the Flight Plan. So we measure our entirety of our carbon footprint, and we have a plan that we're on track to deliver a reduction of 50% by 2025, and then as close to zero as we can possibly get by 2030. And there's a lot of factors, as you know, to being able to deliver against that, but we're working very, very hard. And it's something that we believe is really the future of the fashion industry and how we will evaluate the products and services that we use every day. That carbon footprints will become a part of the vernacular, as I mentioned, like calories on food. It will become a unifying metric that will help to allow us to make better choices in the way that we consume, because at the moment the landscape is confusing. I think consumers have a very, very strong intent to do the right thing, but in the best of ways, you can't walk down the high street, whether it be in San Francisco, Copenhagen, Auckland, or even in London, without brands making different claims about what they're doing and what is the right thing. So I think we welcome that discussion and debate and that, quite frankly, that regulation around this.
Now, I think we should note the irony of the fact that we've been talking about an all-bird shoe that's made from all sheep. And so with what you're trying to do, having published the recipe book, have big shoe companies come to you and said, we'd like to collaborate and we'd like to take on this idea? And how are they going to scale if it's going to come from this one farm where you're getting this carbon negative wool from?
Well, yes, and we've already worked with Adidas. We launched a shoe a year and a half ago that was 2.94 kilograms of carbon, give or take half a hamburger. It was one of the first times that two competing footwear companies had worked together. And then on the back of this, the answer is yes. I think what I find every day, and sometimes the fashion industry gets a bad rep, but I hear and I see incredible intent, particularly within the creative and design communities, to make better products, to find solutions. But it's a complicated landscape, again, with this behemoth of a topic, which sometimes doesn't always allow entry points in for people. And so hopefully this is an example of making this easier, making it accessible, and hopefully an invitation for others to come and join us.
So next time people eat a hamburger, the one thing, if you want to take something away from this conversation, is that hamburger was twice the shoe that an all-birds company shoe makes. Not this one, because this is carbon neutral, right?
This one's zero. I hope you take more away from that from this conversation. But you know, it does make a larger point, and particularly this is fresh in my mind coming out of what is really the pinnacle event on the fashion calendar around this topic in Copenhagen, that we need to align on a simpler way of discussing this. I think when you hear a word like sustainability, not only are you confused as to what exactly it means, you also, through the lens of the consumer, you assume something is more expensive and less good. So I think we need to continue to make sure in this conversation we're speaking the language, as we have done to farmers, of economic opportunity, of products that, much like a Tesla, isn't electric and environmentally friendly. It's fast and good looking and gets you from A to B in style. And we need to be comfortable, particularly in the context of fashion, talking about creating objects of desire at the same time that we're deeply discussing the tenets of sustainability.
Now, we're here at the Sustainable Business Summit, and that word sustainable can mean multiple things, right? It's sustainability on the environment, but it's sustaining a business. You launched the company as a Kickstarter back in 2016. It was very popular. One of my colleagues who was in San Francisco said she couldn't walk by without seeing an all-bird shoe when she was reporting from San Francisco a few years ago. You had an IPO in 2021 with $1 billion valuation. That was about $26 stock price at the high. Now it's $1.30. What happened?
It's a complicated world, and we have come a long way in a short space of time, as you mentioned, from a Kickstarter campaign and a video that was filmed on a family friend's sheep farm for $700 with the help of my brother not that long ago. And we're now playing, if you'll indulge me in a football metaphor, in the Premier League of business. And it's both a remarkable achievement to get this far, and equally we now need to prove that we can be a great public company. And I believe that we can. We're 7 years into what I think can be a 100-year journey to build the next generation help build the next generation of brands that are anchored in an environmental purpose, that can stop using the word sustainability because it's not tacked on to an existing infrastructure, but it's been there in the beginning and it's core to the strategy. I think we're at a really interesting moment where what I might term a say-do gap, not that I came up with that, but there is incredible intent, and we see it in our research and with our insights from the consumers to engage with brands that place the environment, climate change, carbon, sustainability at the heart of the way that they make products. And yet when they go to consume, when they go to the checkout, it often doesn't translate into action. And look, I think all of this will change. I'm sure you've talked about it today. That consumer intent is there, and I think the businesses that prepare and get this right will win in the long run, and we've got work to do. We've got things to prove, but we're very, very early days in terms of our journey.
So you have a good product, you have sustainability attached to it, and you have a story to be able to tell with it. So what is it that's the problem? Is it declining sales? If they are declining sales, then how are you going to do more to be able to make sure that the business gets to the point of being able to play in the big league?
I disagree with one thing you said. I don't think sustainability is attached to it. I think sustainability is at the core of why the business was founded, because we believe we're on the cusp of a transformation in the category. For 50 years, we've been innovating in synthetic materials and plastic, and we're on the cusp through regenerative agriculture, consumer awareness, of a shift back to natural materials, of new ways of making and constructing products as we transform to a more sustainable economy. And we need to continue to remember, us and all brands, that people don't buy sustainable products, they buy great ones. I don't believe a product can be great today unless it's anchored in the tenets of sustainability, however you may define that. And I believe we have to execute really, really well. Again, a sustainable business needs to be a profitable one. I believe there is an enormous growth opportunity in the category for the ones that get it right, and we're uniquely positioned to take advantage of that, but we have to go prove that.
And as part of that, you've gone through a reorganization. You were co-CEO, now you're Chief Innovation Officer, your CFO stepped down. What exactly are you doing to get to the profitability? What are the steps that you have planned, apart from good products which are core to being able to run a business?
Well, thank you for saying they're good products. I wish you were wearing them.
Well, they're not available in the market
It'd be a little bit. It'd be
2024.
It'd be a little bit more credible.
I'll buy one when
it'd be a little bit more credible if you were wearing them. But I'll take it. As I said, it's a challenging world. We're a young company, and we are going through a steep learning curve as a recently public company that's been hit quite hard. The opportunity remains a big one. We need to execute incredibly well. We have an incredible team of people that are attracted to this idea and the need to do things differently, and we need to execute really, really well. It's interesting in the context of a word like sustainability as it ties to business strategy. What we find more often than not, almost all the time actually, as we work to improve our margin, is that sustainable initiatives and innovations are also margin improvements. They're also efficiencies. As we look to create lower carbon products, we need to look at the totality of how it's made, and that includes packaging, shipping, the density of how we ship and package our products, what we make those out of, how we reduce waste, how we limit weight. Every aspect of that goes into a carbon footprint calculation of a product. And more often than not, it's also about efficiency. So in the same way that we need to focus not on making sustainable products, but great ones, we also need to focus on building a sustainable and profitable business for the long term. And I don't think those two things are in conflict.
Well, and one place where one way to think about sustainability is to consume less. And so you do focus a lot on the end of life, on making sure that the pair of shoes lasts as long as it can. But that conflicts with sales, because if you're going to make a product that's going to last that long, then will people buy as many pairs of shoes? I mean, this is a famous problem that, tech companies have been called out for. Obsolescence that's planned into a product. Obviously, you're not trying to do that, but how do you play around the problem of consuming less and yet being more profitable?
Well, this conversation is happening in real time, but I'll tell you about something that happened that was famous. One of the iconic consumer brands of our time, Patagonia, in 2011, on Black Friday, took out an ad in the New York Times and it said,
buy a jacket?
"Don't buy this jacket."
Yep.
It was provocative, profound, and yet we know that between now and then we've continued to buy a lot of jackets. Reducing how we consume, focusing on quality, they're all parts of the answer, they're not the total answer. We know that we're going to continue to buy T-shirts and shoes, and part of the challenge here is to engineer those products, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes from natural materials, and to make them with net zero impact, or as close as we possibly can to that. And we need to do both. And I think there's an enormous opportunity to do that and to do it well. I think people want ice cream in this moment. They want easy answers. I get asked a lot about recyclability and end of life. People want to take a pair of shoes, send them back to you, and imagine that they'll be taken apart and remade into something. And of course, it's not that easy, and it's extraordinarily complicated. Really, this is like Al Pacino in Any Given Sunday. This is a game of inches. It's about measurement. It's about innovation. It's about embedding sustainability in the strategy of your business, because you believe that in the future consumers will not think about net zero carbon as a nice to have, but as a necessity. And as we look, like on the cover of The Guardian today, to governments to inevitably get involved in this conversation to bring regulation and clarity and agreed upon standards to what is the wild, wild west of this particular topic at the moment. I think all of these dots will connect in the fullness of time.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks, everyone. And if you want to hear more of these conversations, please do listen to Zero. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.
Cheers, mate. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. I'll take these.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. That is the end of our Sustainable Business Summit London. I'd like to thank all of our speakers and our moderators for their time today. I'd love to thank our summit advisors, EY, Red Sea Global, and Schneider Electric. And I would love to also thank all of you for your time today and being such an engaged audience. For more information on our sponsors, you can visit the Resources tab on the website. You can also find further information there on our other upcoming Sustainable Business Summits, including our Singapore Summit at the end of July, and then our October Summit will be in New York. So you can join those. If you have colleagues that are in those regions, they can join us there as well. You can also watch any of these clips on demand on BloombergLive.com as well after the event. Thank you so much, and please join us for the networking reception that will be right outside. Thanks.